There we go. One more minute and we will start. So I appreciate everyone joining us. Grab another sip of coffee before we go, and feel free to have a drink yourself. Well, it's 9:59. It's going to be 10 o'clock in a second. I just wanted to again thank everyone for joining us. Know Before You Fly Your Drone workshop. It's number 18. So just so excited. Yeah, we have had so many amazing topics, and today is nothing less but amazing too. So we're going to go ahead and start. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this. So feel free to go to our NorthTexasUAS.com, and probably usually we put it in Thursday or Friday. We upload it to the website, and then you can go back and look at it or share it with anyone that you'd like. So I really appreciate it. Today is a really special day. Last month we honored women, and this is specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's about opening up the uncrewed, not unmanned, aerial systems to everyone that's interested, not just a certain group. Want to go over real quick that the reason we're doing this is a free workshop, but the North Central Texas Council of Governments has convened the North Texas, used to be unmanned, but we're going to call it uncrewed aircraft systems safety and integration task force to help mitigate reckless UAS operations and promote safe integration of UAS technology in DFW. Ernest started this, Ernest Huffman, who's with us today, started this initiative. And I remember the very first committee, because we met live once a month with both private and state representatives. So basically what this is federal, state, local levels, as well as private sectors represented from aviation and UAS industries, academic, military, and others. So imagine everyone coming together and talking about what's happening in the region and also just in the world. And it has been so educational. And this is one of the initiatives, this Know Before You Fly Your Drone workshop. So I just wanted to give everyone an intro to just let everyone know why we're doing this. And before I go on and on and on, I want to introduce you to Dawn Zaldi and Marlene Conway-Deals. Thank you so much. They're the first ones that are going to talk. And I was so excited about hearing that this survey that was sponsored by the Women in Drones reached out to so many of the industries on how they view DEI and what they were doing. So Dawn, do you mind just starting and telling us a little bit, number one, a little bit about P3 Tech and how you got involved, and then Marlene, if you'll do the next, I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely, thanks. Hi everybody, Dawn Zoldi here. As Maggie just said, I'm the CEO and founder of P3 Tech Consulting. Founded the company in October of 2019, and our mission is to connect people with a passion for advanced technology platforms with the plans, programs, policies, and information they need to succeed. And that's kind of mushroomed into a whole bunch of different lines of effort, including diversity, equity, inclusion, and workforce development in the UAS and AAM industries. And I'm going to give it to Marlene to talk about it. But just to be clear, this was absolutely a kind of a three-way collaborative with Women in Drones, Diversity Development Network of Canada, DDNC, Marlene's group, and then P3 Tech. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of our, our actual sponsor. So Marlene, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Don. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Maggie, and everyone for allowing me to participate today. I'm Marlene Conway Deals. I'm president and founder of the Diversity Development Network of Canada, which is a national nonprofit organization. Our differentiator is really that we're focusing on common infrastructure and supports that can be widely used by all of our constituents, which include industry, government, diverse organizations, practitioners, individuals, academia. So we founded in the middle of COVID 2020, and we've really built the membership community and have over 26 members now across Canada and a number of global strategic relationships, such as with Women in Drones and 3P Tech, and we're just super, super stoked. My background actually is as an inventor of a number of patents for developing specialized processes in the environmental field. What that really taught me how to do is build teams and bring groups together. And so I've been in the aerospace advanced manufacturing genre for almost 20 years. I can't believe it. And really, this was all done in the recognition that if we're going to have talent, I'm sure Samantha's going to talk about this, but if we're going to have talent to fill the voids and support that growth, we need to be thinking on a more wider and inclusive basis. And so we're excited to be here today.
That is a perfect segue, Marlene. If you want to pop up those slides, we'll go ahead and get started with our briefing. Obviously this is live. So for those that are here, absolutely drop your questions, your comments in the chat. If you're here, we're assuming it's because you want to hear more about this. We were talking before this session that, on social media, when we post up things about diversity, sometimes it doesn't always get the warmest welcome or reception, which is a little bit disappointing. But we know that if you're here, it's because you have a heart and an interest for this. And so for that, we thank you in advance. The other thing we want to say is both Marlene and myself have put our contact information in the chat. I know there's going to be a little bit at the end as well, but absolutely link in with us no matter what, through all of our social media and through our websites. Same with obviously Women in Drones. If you're not a member, what are you waiting for? Incredible organization, which is exactly why we're partnering with Sharon Rossmark, who I respect, just so much. And okay, let's go ahead and get started. Basically, like any good military briefing, we're going to tell you what we're going to tell you. We're going to tell you what we're going to tell you, and then we're going to tell you what we told you. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see. And bottom line on this, Marlene, I don't know if you want to do the next slide here.
Sure.
So before we get into kind of the definitions, which are extremely important because words matter. If you notice, Maggie said uncrewed instead of unmanned, which in and of itself is inclusive language, but also language that has met with some resistance from some in the UAS and AM community. So we'll go through these definitions here, but we did this, we put out a survey last year in the August timeframe, actually extended it. It was about 6 weeks long, and got over 1,000 responses. So that we wanted to set a baseline for the industry because we thought we knew what the diversity kind of breakdown was in the industry. But what this did was validate that, honestly, and it provides a great benchmark for the industry going forward. So when you look at this definition of diversity, it's very wide ranging. One thing I will tell you, a shortcoming and just upfront full transparency in our survey is we did not include age, and we should have in our questions. We did in our definition. And a couple of folks called us out on it, and good on that, good on them. We do plan to do obviously a follow-up survey this year around the same time frame, and we are going to be sure to include age. Unfortunately, we won't have kind of that comparison information year to year, but we will going forward. So just up front, when we talk about diversity, we're talking very, very broadly, not just about the things that you see, which most people kind of think of automatically when they think of diversity. Think gender, they think race, right? But it's other things like your political perspective or your religious background or your national origin and things like this. So very holistically, all those different kind of identities that a person might have, that's the diversity that they bring to the table to any organization. When you think about equity, I really want to kind of foot stomp this because equity and inclusion are so key. You may have a diverse organization, but if you're not treating people equitably, meaning fairly, stomping out discrimination and bias when you see it, creating a culture of inclusion that is actually welcoming and listening to those perspectives, then you're falling short. One thing I wanted to highlight just this morning, I'm always out there looking at the news. I'm going to drop this link in the chat real quick. CBS actually put out an article today about the 5, I'm pasting it now, the 5 top issues that, to create a toxic workplace. And, because this is why we're talking about this. We're talking about businesses that exist today and the workforce of tomorrow, right? Recruiting and retaining diverse people in your organization. So the number one, according to this article that just came out today, what a toxic culture looked like, number one, is being non-inclusive. It literally says where members across gender, race, sexual identity, orientation, disability, age, don't feel they are treated fairly, welcomed, or included in key decisions. Researchers caution that although these identity-related topics may not apply to all employees, they have a big impact. For example, quote, respect is mentioned 30 times more frequently in employee reviews than LGBTQ equity, but both topics have the same impact on an employee's view of the culture when they are discussed negatively in a review. So I just, look, this is so timely, so relevant, and I wanted to put this article out from today because this is exactly why we are talking to you, to make your businesses better, to make the future of the industry better. This isn't political correctness. This is about having the best organization you can possibly have today and tomorrow. So go ahead.
Don, can I ask you a quick question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. And actually, great point. ROE, as we say in the military, rules of engagement. Go ahead and fire away in the chat, or go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, and yeah, we are welcoming questions. But when you're talking about number one, when you did the survey with Marlene and Women in Drones, the industry, can you define a little bit about who you reached out to find out what their culture is?
Absolutely. So Marlene is going to cover that a couple slides from now. Actually, the industries that were represented in the survey. So very, very broad. And I'm not going to steal her thunder, so I'll leave it at that. But
okay,
great question, Maggie, and we did anticipate that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Marlene, next slide, please.
Thank you. May I just add one more thing to
Yes,
this
please.
discussion that you had, because you brought this other article. It's how it's been described. People need to have a quote safe place to feel welcomed and respected in their environment. But I've been retuned on that to call it a brave space, because for people to really express themselves, they have to feel safe, and therefore they also have to be brave, because they always run a risk of having some kind of repercussion from their other people that they're working with. So what we're trying to do is not be the flavor of the month, because when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's become this banner that everybody says, oh yes, we're really big and really interested in this. But it's more than that. It's a cultural shift within the company, within the management of the organization. And so we're really looking for long-term sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion. So yes, I will move it along now. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Marlene. I appreciate that. That clarifies a lot.
Great stuff. Okay. So we talked, Marlene and I, a little bit about our own organizations. They're in the slides. I know these slides will also be available through the Know Before You Fly Your Drones network. Women in Drones, you kind of mentioned them, but just wanted to highlight, since 2018, which is not too long after their founding, they've been listed as one of the top companies to watch in the UAS industry, which is pretty significant. So again, if you have not joined Women in Drones, I once again repeat, what are you waiting for?
And you
Okay.
don't have to be a woman to join. Just let's
Thank
No,
you.
absolutely not. In
This is
fact,
for everyone.
this is the point, right? We're talking about inclusivity and diversity. If we don't have people other than women advocating and being allies of women, we will never succeed. So collectively, we will never succeed. So absolutely. Thank you for that, Maggie. All right, next slide, please. And I mentioned this, alluded a little earlier, we were partners in this jointly, our three companies, but Vertical Flight Society really stepped up and provided us some funding to incentivize that survey. We did a random draw every 50 registrants for that survey, and they sponsored gift cards, $50 gift cards for those folks. So that was pretty incredible, and we're very appreciative of Vertical Flight Society, and they're doing incredible things, by the way. Danielle McLean, who works quite a bit on their diversity efforts, and Mike Hirschberg, their director, have really partnered up with Women in Drones and Marlene and myself, essentially, to put out some information to the advanced air mobility community very specifically. And we may get a chance to talk about that later. If we don't, that's fine, but definitely hit us up. We can elaborate later. All right, next slide. All right, Marlene, I believe this is where you take it over.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, we were really quite thrilled. We were not expecting the survey response that we did receive. We had 1,081 responses in just a few week period. And so it was, as well, you'll hear from the geography amongst the United States, the physical states, but almost every single state was represented. But we wanted to make sure that there were not duplicates. Because there was a gift card, we wanted to make sure that Susie didn't fill in 300 responses and therefore kind of nullify the validity of any of the information. There were 25, so we sorted by IP address, and there were 25 similar IP addresses. However, they were in different jurisdictions, so we felt that they could have been company related. In any case, there was only one single duplicate response. So we have over a 99% confidence level that we really have something that's representative and bona fide as well. And in addition, we had, there were 1,081, so we had 22 cards, draws that were made, one out of every 50 respondents, and everyone's email address was valid. So no one came back as being bogus. So we're pretty confident in that and in that basis. But the goal of this was really to establish that benchmark, as Dawn said, so that we have a solid base on which to work from, as well to really get from people what do they want? What would be goodness, as we like to call it? What kind of programs would be interesting? What kind of resources do you need? How could we make this accessible to your organization? So now some of the demographics of the people that responded. It was very interesting. As you can see, this distribution, it's 52% of the respondents had less than 100 employees. And I think that's really, really quite important, because you have some huge players in the AAM UAS sector, but then you have a number of small innovative companies that really will be driving technology and technology development. And these are employers. So it's quite interesting as well. Let me see, I have another little note there. Yeah, 1% had more than 1,000 employees. So you can really see the distribution is at the smaller level. This next slide talks about all the different business sector activities within the AAM UAS sector. And number one was, interestingly enough, the service providers. So telecommunication, data collection, that kind of thing. Then the original equipment manufacturers. So the other service provider was almost 32%. Just below that at 30% was the OEM. And then the drone service providers themselves had 20.8%. So as you can see, there's quite a wide distribution of sectors. We were really happy to see that, so that it wasn't just one-sided, and we had a pretty broad perspective from the group. So I do have this information about the states. I can't believe my little paper's gone. We had something like 367 from California. The next in line was, which, pardon me, had 40% of the responses, then Texas, Colorado, Arizona, and Arkansas, and in that order of distribution as well. So Texas had approximately 5%, Colorado was 4.2, Arizona was 4.1, and Arkansas was 3.3%. And then there's a number of small representations. It was very hard to show that graphically because it's such a wide difference between 300 and 374 from California and the smaller states that have 1 to 5 type of respondents. But as you can see, there was a good representation across the United States.
And Marlene, if you could go back for a second, if I could just tag on for 1 minute. Some of you may be familiar with the Mercatus Center. Brent Scorup is from there. He's kind of well known for this avigation comments that he has been making. And he and a colleague did a report a little ways back scoring states in terms of drone friendliness. And so we kind of correlated, where we're getting these responses from versus what he and his colleague ranked as some of the top 10 states in terms of drone friendliness. And there was a direct correlation. So that actually was also validating for us that, the states that are doing great with drones, like their people are taking the survey, so they're engaged, and it just made a lot of sense to us. So I'll leave it at that, and sorry to interrupt, Marlene.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. So then this next slide here, I'm just going to move this because it's right in my way. Okay, so here we're talking, we're talking about the client size of base here. So what's interesting is that 64% are less than 100,000, 4.3% are over 500,000, and 1.1% of respondents was over 2 million. So again, you can see that there's a lot of small companies that are servicing smaller geographies in whatever services they're providing to the sector. We did also we had a choice, obviously, when we were putting the results together and doing this analysis, whether we wanted to show it all as percentages, but we thought it was more valuable to see the number of companies. And so that's why all the slides you'll see reference the number of companies within the respondent group for that particular question, because that's where it shows significance, I think.
Marlene, this is Maggie again. Did you reach out to any of the government entities when you were asked, doing this survey? For
Yes,
instance, the FAA?
I personally was not responsible for the mailing list because we utilized because it was a United States survey, we utilized Women in Drones, 3P Tech Networks, as well as just totally moved that out on social media as well. So we do have government agencies, though, that responded to that. So let me just go back a couple slides, if I may, here. It's going to let me.
Yeah, I was really surprised that California, there was such a difference in the response. But
well, Maggie, when you look at I think Marlene's showing this slide now, the number of other service providers like telecoms,
Right.
Internet of Things, we're talking Silicon Valley now, right? Because people are creating like these enabling technologies, whether it's detect and avoid technologies, other avionics, unmanned traffic management. NASA has a huge presence in California. So
Right.
it wasn't really surprising to see such a, everybody thinks when they think drones are providers and equipment manufacturers, but all those enabling technologies are growing and they're very significant.
Yeah, I can see that now and understand that. So Dawn, just to answer the question on the government entities, do you kind of have an idea of what percentage that you sent out to government entities?
131 of 1,061 respondents were government entities. You see
so
that?
I don't do public math, but that's what, 10% roughly?
It's less than that, but
Less than 10%.
Okay.
So when it comes to how we distributed the survey, as Marlene alluded to, Women in Drones pushed it out through their network. Vertical Flight Society pushed it out through their network. Marlene did, as did I. And then we also pushed it out through a number of media outlets, like through Drone Life, the Drone Girl, Sally French, a whole host of folks. Some people published about it, some people did not. Yeah, I can't recall. I know we sent it to drone responders. I don't know if they pushed it out widely to their public safety community. They have a very large network, as you know. But absolutely offline. If anybody has suggestions, also drop them in the chat as you're listening, how we can improve. Because we were stoked to get over 1,000 responses. Next year, we'd like to double that or even more. So if you have ideas of how to get the word out better, like through the Texas, North Central Texas Council of Governments Network next year, let's do that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do that, right, Ernest?
Yeah, it will grow. It's going to grow organically as well as by making these collaborations like we're doing today. It's so important. So now we see where the companies are. We see that most of the companies are small and from in terms of employment base, but this is also really important. This shows the use of the whole sector. And if you look at it, I have some little interesting notes here. Yeah. So 88% have been in business less than 3 years of the respondents. And so that also shows the growth and the emergence, certainly in Canada. I'm sure you think of it in the States in the same way, but we see this as one of the last new frontiers, if you will, in the whole aerospace genre, where there is the most room for growth. And to that point, if you look at the Deloitte Insights report that just recently came out, they said that by 2035, this is going to be $115 billion industry, United States only, and we'll have a requirement of 280,000 people, and it will service 50% in cargo and 50% in passenger. So when you think about from that perspective, we have to really open the doors in order to find those kinds of talented people. And we really need to be inclusive to do it. If you're going to support that kind of growth, that's huge. I don't know any other industry sector that has that kind of growth trajectory. So definitely you see that there is, I think it was 1%, 2.7% had been established for over 5 years. And we did have a number, small though, a number of really large companies. And so you can see that that makes sense. These people just didn't jump into the industry, right? They are the grounding pioneers. And then there's a whole lot of small companies that have innovation that are going to fill around that. So we need the brightest talents. I like to call them unicorns, but Samantha's going to talk about that. Okay. I think now that we're now at the 10 top takeaways, Dawn, it's over to you.
Yeah,
hun.
yeah, absolutely. So by the way, we'll talk about it more at the end, but our final report is well over 100 pages long, full of insights. We're really giving you the very kind of, let's call it wave top, to use a Navy term, wave top, takeaways from this report. And this summary, by the way, is also available on the Women in Drones website for download. It's been available since like January, and it's free. So go ahead and download that summary report. It's a great document, and our final report should be up soon, but I'll let Marlene talk about that at the end here. All right, so number one. First thing I'll say is not only do we ask for, like, no kidding, factual data, we also asked for kind of perception and belief, right, about people's perceptions and belief. And this is more of a belief question, where we ask these respondents, like, do you believe diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to organizational success? And overwhelmingly, they said yes. So it was really only about roughly 14% that said it was not. And then the balance were either unsure or just preferred not to say. So once again, the overwhelming majority believe this is important. And, believing is a great step to action. So we were very encouraged by this. Next slide, please. All right. So not only that, but people also express concern about their perceived lack of diversity, not only in the industry, but also at the within their own organization. So this is kind of a compilation in a way of a couple different questions. This takeaway, if you will. Again, we break this down in much more fidelity in the report. But not only are they concerned, they're actually pretty darn concerned about it. Like, over 80% ranged from moderate to very extreme concern about the lack of DEI in their own business and organization. And we saw that also mirrored in kind of questions about the industry in general. So they believe it's important. They're concerned that it doesn't exist. Next slide, please. All right. And then here's the factual stuff. Now, we all kind of, had this going in, had this idea or notion that, looking around, the industry isn't diverse. I mean, I don't know how many times, I've been in on a panel and I'm the only woman. Maggie and Nettie Davis just had a tremendous clubhouse yesterday with Lexi Jansen, who's now flying air speeders. Those flying cars that are like drag racing vehicles, but flying in the air. Yeah, she's out of Australia now. And, when I asked her, are you the first or the only woman? She said, there was one other. She's no longer with us. I'm the only woman doing this. And, just again, another real world example. Just discussed it yesterday. Go to Maggie's clubhouse called Drone Pep Talks. You can listen to that replay. It was a great session. But the point is, when we asked this question, how diverse is your organization? We did see kind of I will say a smattering of identity groups across the board. But when it came to the top of the organization, shockingly, or maybe not so, it was generally speaking the white racial group and male, and then female, I believe, was number 2.
Yes,
I think this says, yeah, so white, it wasn't the combination of white females, it was white and then I believe male and then female, if I recall correctly.
That's right.
And other groups were very much, I will say, marginalized. In other words, the drop off between like the number of females in leadership positions in an organization and, let's just say, African American, the African American identity group, very significant gap. And in fact, Marlene, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if memory serves, the African American identity group was the least represented, I believe, at the top. This is just from memory, but that's kind of what I'm recalling, because it was a little bit surprising.
So if I can add to that, so we had, as you may have seen, a number of different groups that we actually identified. So there was the base question, and we broke it down into Asian, Hawaiian, Native American, Indigenous, Hispanic, white, and we had the LGBTQ. We had all of these different groups, and the curves on them were almost identical for all of these questions, because for several of them, we have a homogeneous answer, and then we broke it down and analyzed it by the different groups. But almost inevitably, it showed that all of where the employment was and the leadership was very small, almost nothing at the top. So what that for me is a real opportunity to widen that inclusive door and to get that additional talent in. Because if you remember our first set of discussion about the definition of diversity, it's way more than gender. So it takes in all of these other kinds of demographics into consideration as well. So we need that talent. We need people with new ideas and fresh at the senior management level in order to really affect change.
Absolutely.
Marlene, may I ask, this is Maggie again. One of the things that we really haven't touched, and I know that we have some representation in the UAS industry, is the disability, whether it be just a mental disability or a physical disability. And so did you include that in your survey?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
So yes, that was another group. That's a good point, Dawn. I think I'll add a slide to show the groups, because here it's a collection. And just to give a listing of the groups that we did, provide identity to.
That, and again, that's all of this is in the full report. One other thing I wanted to say about this is, Boeing, the Boeing company did their own survey, and again, focused on internally in their own company, aerospace and defense giant, 2021 last year. And what they found, that men comprise 77.1% of the overall workforce. and 83.4% of its engineers. So 68.8% of the company's employees identified as white. And so again, this is one example of many where you see this paralleled in the results that we found as people answered. So what we tried to do is when we found this research, we found these other surveys, this information, we used it to kind of bounce against what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And it was consistent and validating that, yes, this is in fact the case. So, all right, let's go ahead and do the next one.
Sorry, if I could just add one more thought to that, if I may,
Yeah.
please, Don, in that, you know, if you think about the evolution of aerospace, right, and the diverse makeup, you're absolutely bang on. Less than 25% in the technical roles are female, but that was a very established conservative sector. And as we're growing now, and as we're changing and widening the kind of sectors, meaning adding advanced air mobility and uncrewed aerial systems, we have the opportunity now to make that more inclusive. So it probably sounds like I'm beating a drum, but it's just, I wouldn't want anyone to feel punitive. It's just a statement of fact as to where we're at. And so it just really shows the opportunity for growth in those areas.
Absolutely. All right. So, you know, we don't have like graphs for this one, just kind of talk through this a little bit. And number 4 was more of a kind of, again, a belief perception question. You know, what do you believe? What financial impact would you believe will happen if you don't have a diverse workforce available to your organization or to the industry? And look, minus 4%, you know, like everybody but 4% said there would be a financial impact from limited to severe. And look, the reality is, and I'll quote, not quote, but semi-quote, paraphrase Mike Hirschberg from Vertical Flight Society, did a tremendous op-ed with eVTOL Insights last year, talking about just in the engineering career field, that if we don't inspire diverse individuals to become engineers, we're going to be at least 10,000 people short of what is going to be required for the advanced air mobility sector to succeed. 10,000 engineers, very significant. And, you know, looking at, you know, going back to the very beginning, all the different ecosystems, you know, that doesn't include drone service providers, right? I mean, most, you know, you don't need to be an engineer to be a DSP, you know, so just kind of, again, highlighting this, the reality and the beliefs are aligning here. So when people are believing, they're actually seeing as well, and it is reflected in the real world. Number 5, the importance of UAS AAM. And I think to the industry, people need to understand this. 85% of the people that took this survey believed this idea that it's really important for others to appreciate the importance of this. And it kind of goes back to what Maggie and you know, a few of us were talking about before we went live this morning, this idea that there are groups out there, when we use the D word, it's like the F word. It's like somehow it's a bad word. Diversity somehow has become something that is negative. And you know, that education for people, because look, spoiler alert here, when you boil all this down, and we're going to get a little bit to this later of what is needed, one word, I'll give you one word. It's called leadership, period. Because leaders create culture. Leaders set policies. Leaders drive the direction of an organization and an industry. And until leaders walk that talk, this cultural change and these changes are not going to happen. And it is the leaders that need to not just say it, but do it every day in a deliberate manner that's going to turn the tide here. And when you hear things or see things, you stomp them out, but not in a punitive way, to use Marlene's terms. You know, you have to kill people with kindness and educate them. You know, a lot of this is, frankly, it's ignorance. It's a lack of understanding.
And the desire not to make a mistake from a corporate perspective. So
Yeah.
when you don't know what to do, and that's one of the reasons DDNC was formed, because I spoke to government agencies, I spoke to industry of all sizes, academia. They all believed in it, they were all interested in it, but they did not know what to do. And so we have to make a forum that's available that people can participate in, as well as provide real tangible tools and resources to help people, because every company is different. So it's not a single one size fits all solution. So we have to think of things more in the form of a menu, if you will, of different options and resources that are available that suit your business plan and your strategy, but help you make a change.
Absolutely.
I would think that one of the words that pop up when you were describing leadership is acceptance. By having strong leaders in example, you have an acceptance in the culture. So yeah, I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I didn't mention when I was doing my own intro is the fact that, in the year 2020, I was actually the deputy director of the United States Air Force Academy Center for Character and Leadership Development. So all I did every single day is not only lead my own organization, but I was acting director for a period of about 5 months just as COVID hit, and had to do some serious cultural and policy changes during that time and implement all of that. So, 25 years active duty United States Air Force, retiring as a colonel, leading a lot of organizations, working with the highest levels of government and international communities and colleagues in the joint community. I get the leadership concept and, kind of what is needed. So again, it boils down to that one word. It's all about culture. Next slide, please. All right, so here's the great news. So Houston, we have a problem. Use your Texas language there. And the good news is people actually are interested in changing. That is, so the first step is recognizing you have a problem. We got that. The second step is acknowledging that, you want to change. And it appears that at least the people that took this survey, and again, our assumption is the people that took this survey are people that believe DEI is important. The people that maybe have making those rude comments on social media, they probably didn't take this survey. But the ones that took it are super interested, moderate to extremely interested in changing, increasing DEI in their own business and organization. So that is a great news story. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I am trying to do that for you.
No worries. It's Zoom life.
Isn't it though?
And it kind of jammed up.
Yeah, hang on a sec. Oh, wait a minute. I can do it now. There we go.
All right, perfect. Thanks. So there are organizations that have instituted programs, policies, initiatives, things to help recruit, retain, bolster a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion in their organizations. So many folks felt that those programs were not effective when they had them. But sadly, 60%, the majority, more than 50 here, said that there were no processes, programs, training, or initiatives at all, or that they were just simply ineffective. So when you think about, it's almost like, is it worse to have nothing or to have something that's bad? Think about that for a second, because I don't know about you all, but especially having been in the Air Force, and, sometimes it is the flavor of the day. They'll have this quality Air Force thing and everybody has to take some training. And then, the next year, like it's some other topic, and it sometimes has a rebound effect where people are like, I'm so sick of talking about this, or this is so ineffective, it makes me angry. That's not useful. So having good and positive initiatives that are viewed in that light are really critical to change culture. Just throwing up a computer-based training and calling it good, like a checklist, not going to work.
No.
Okay. And my guess is that is kind of what is happening in some organizations. So number one, good for trying, but if it's literally like we have to check the square and there's not a lot of thought put into this or review of those programs to determine their effectiveness, to constantly evaluate, and then modify as needed, that's where there needs to be some improvement. On the other hand, it was very encouraging to see that there were like a lot of best practices, things like zero tolerance for harassment and sexual assault. Now you may be thinking, we're talking about diversity. That's like race, gender, sexual orientation. Why are we even talking about sexual assault? It's because those things get at the heart of some of those identity groups and create a very unsafe workplace.
Yeah.
So, if you're working and everybody's commenting, on your appearance, and that's all they talk about when you're working your what off, but it's like, oh, nice eyeshadow today. That can be very demoralizing. And then it's like, how seriously are they really taking the work that I'm doing when all they're talking about is how I look? So again, having practices about harassment, about sexual assault, all good. Those policies are important. There are organizations, again, this feedback, this comes down to leadership. Are you talking to your employees? Are you getting feedback? Actually taking action, like taking it on board and then taking positive action to address it. And if for some reason you can't, are you explaining why you can't? So people can appreciate why something is or is not happening in response to like the feedback they gave. At least 76% are actively seeking employee feedback about culture. That's good. That's really good. The question is, what are they doing about that information? What was kind of sad to me is this. A smaller percentage are recognizing employee achievement. And again, you're probably thinking, okay, why are we even talking about employee achievement? This is about diversity, equity, inclusion. What did I say? This is about leadership. And if you're not taking a minute to thank people, appreciate them, having some kind of a recognition program where you're showing like, look at this person, putting them up on a pedestal, and making sure as you're doing those programs that they are equitably, you're not just putting the same kinds of people up, again, based on merit. This doesn't have to be like, oh, what's the color of this is not the point. But are you recognizing people? Are you recognizing them fairly? Are you looking at that at all in your business? Very, very important, because little things matter. And, something like, employee of the month, or even just walk around at your staff meeting, having, kind of a kudos session at the end where you're giving props to people. Those kind of things actually matter.
Yes,
And how you execute them possibly matters even more. And so even though some of them could be improved upon according to people that were experiencing those, because maybe they're viewing them as, Johnny always seems to be getting employee of the quarter. What's up with that? And what is that criteria? And how is it being executed? And last, on this slide, last but not least here, there's definitely a desire for people to have programs to understand DEI, but other skills. So once again, we're getting at leadership here. This isn't just, we're going to throw more unconscious bias training at you. This is not what this was about. These were people saying very specifically, we want information, hypothetically speaking, on, I don't know, conflict management.
Negotiation, persuasion, leadership, collaboration.
So yeah, so this is again, it comes down to human interactions in the workplace, that when you look at the big bubble, you put it under this bubble of culture, and how do you effectuate change in culture? And look, this is not something Marlene, Sharon, or I like invented. This desire in people to want to just feel appreciated and be respected and feel included. It's reality, and that's what people are saying. We want to learn more about these things. Next slide.
This says it all.
Yeah, this really said it all. I mean, essentially, almost every respondent, when asked, like, hey, would you be on an advisory committee to develop some practices, some programming, training, they all said, pretty much all said, heck yes. We want to,
94.1%.
yeah, they want to be part of the change. And so, you know, Marlene's going to talk about the way forward here, and I'm going to get off the podium. But here's the key takeaway for all of you listening. Some of these people may be working for you right now. And my question is, are you seeking them out? Because I will tell you, at the local grassroots level, they can be helping you make this change right now because they want to. And so if there's anything you take away from here, because look, us moving a larger group and kind of creating this, and that's going to take a little while. But something you can literally do Monday when you go back to work, or you have your next staff meeting, is look everybody in the eye and say, I just got this, I participated in this presentation on Saturday about the industry. Here's some of the things I learned. I'm really eager to hear your feedback. And here's what we're going to do about it. And if any of you are interested in helping us make a change, if you feel like we can be better, because by the way, we can all be better, then let's do it. And I'm going to tell you, you do that and your morale is going to skyrocket, and probably your productivity too. Because now people like
sustainability.
Absolutely.
It's about sustainability for sure, because the worst thing that can happen is get people motivated, engaged, and then falls away, right? That's so damaging. So we've got to do something sustainable.
Agreed. Over to you, Marlene.
The summary, thanks, Hen. The summary report that Dawn referred to was the 10 top takeaways that we've just gone through. The full report goes in way more detail into the recommendations and so much more detail into the analysis. But just as a little preface, very quickly, because we've certainly taken our hour here, there's really 3 retention drivers. So it's one thing about attracting people and hiring them, but if you want to keep them, which is critical, so that you have a strong base to plan your strategic growth on, you know, it's about how the company treats you. Do they give you time off when you need it? It's also about how they pay you. But the real rubber on the road is how you are treated in the office or the shop floor environment by your peers. So if you aren't respected or made to feel of value in any way, or feel unsafe in any way, you're not staying. It's just that simple. So that's really, I think, the number one benefit from having a diverse and inclusive environment, is to be able to make people want to stay and be part of that team. So as you saw, 94.1% of the respondents said, yes, we want to, we were shocked when we saw that number. So we were really excited about that. So that's one of the things that we really want to do, is establish a diversity advisory group. So as you can imagine, if you have 1,000 people that want to participate or more, it's really difficult to get 10 people scheduled together to have a meeting. So you would never be able to do that. But what we can do is break things down into smaller subgroups and subcommittees that feed up into that, because it's important as well to not have a one-size-fits-all solution, to really look at the needs of the different sectors within the industry and make sure that information comes in. More importantly, it's a communication conduit, so that we can get information in, we can give information back out. And as you can see, we're pretty transparent and sharing pretty widely about what our findings are. And it's that kind of collaboration that will affect change. So that's the number one recommendation, is to actually establish this advisory group. But we also want to identify some specific initiatives that we could be doing that would help the industry on a large wide basis. We have a number of infrastructure and supports that combined amongst the Women in Drones, 3P Tech, and the Diversity Development Network are looking at utilizing to make available for the industry, so that they can have access to some of these great programs and training as well. We need to secure, you can have these great initiatives identified, you can have engagement from all of these people, but we need to have some resources in order to develop those programs and get them implemented. In Canada, I'm sure is very similar in the States. Besides being a survey queen, I'm known also as the proposal queen, because getting the resources to make something happen is what's really important. Because if you don't do that, you're just talking and nothing ever changes. So we need to be very selective, very specific in identifying what are the resources needed to support the programs of the most benefit to the group that want to participate, and go and get those. And, we talk in here about it's a crawl, stand, walk type of thing. Nobody's going to push anything on anyone, but we need to get something going, or we'll be talking about this in 2 years and just going around the same pole, which would be more damaging in my opinion. And if we're clever, we can develop programs that can in fact be sustainable. And that's what's really important, so that it's not something that you could do this year, but it's gone forever. So there's a number of specific initiatives, and we clearly could have added recognition to this as well, but it's very, very important. So when we're talking about this, one of the programs that DDNC is working on right now are individual development plans. So you can look at somebody from a skills perspective, both technically and on the soft skills side, and you can identify some gaps for a specific position or a career trajectory, but you're not looking at the whole person. And so these individual development plans are a holistic approach using an algorithm base to develop individual plans for people that also look at their mental wellness states, because in Canada, we've had significant impact from COVID, likewise with the States. And there's been a number of funding programs, actually the last 3 years have been very successful in getting programs to help try to look at this kind of stuff, because over 80% in Canada, and I haven't looked at the studies in the States, believe that there will be residual collateral damage, ongoing mental stress, anxiety, uncertainty, just given this last 2 years of, okay, wear your mask, stay in. No, you can go out. No, back in you go. Nobody knows what to do, but the anxiety is quite tangible. So we're trying to look at things on a holistic basis to provide real supports and resources. And I'm telling you, as a company, if you do something like that, when you, instead of doing an annual review on someone from their quote performance perspective, they're going to know that you care. And care is the one thing that keeps people there as well, right? Because you're treating them respectfully, you're paying them well, and I'm important to my company. So these are just some of the ideas that have come up, and we have that we're looking at to try to bring forward to that larger group. But probably the fifth one is even the most important. We use these theory of change models as a mechanism to properly quantify and have an absolute structured approach at looking at new ideas for development, getting them piloted and tested to see how they worked, getting them evaluated to see if they're effective or whatever by inputs from all of these various groups, as well as then implementing and disseminating that information. It's a continual feedback loop, so that, if you invent this pen, well, that's good today, but in 3 months, it's already obsolete. If you stop continual improvement, you're never going to go anywhere. And it also establishes metrics on which you can gauge your success. So for me, that's really, really important. Going back to the DAG, as we're affectionately calling it, the Diversity Advisory Group, that is a mechanism for input to that theory of change model with total transparency and visibility. And I think that's the other thing that's really important to make this work. We need to collaborate together. We need to work in partnership. We need to be open, because this is going to impact the industry as a whole and grow the industry as a whole. My favorite line from the Grinch that had Jim Carrey in it is when he's in his lair and he's looking in his day book and he goes, Tuesday, 4:00, solve world hunger, tell no one. Well, we're not going to do that, right? If we can solve these diversity, equity, and inclusion ideas, we want them available, we want them utilized. So we are 3 minutes if you have any questions, and then we're done.
A lot of great information. One of the things I wanted to ask both of you, Marlene and Dawn, was there anything that was surprising to you with the feedback that you got through the survey?
Well, I think honestly, we were really surprised at the level of engagement and desire to work together. We were not so surprised at the numbers, the curves that showed the level of management from diverse people. So I think that it really reaffirmed, and we did other research to see where we gauged, and as Dawn mentioned, calibrate those results. But we were really pleased to see some specific answers. We had almost 10,000 comments in that because
Oh
we
my
left
goodness.
lots of room for people to do it. It was quite a nightmare. And we put them in buckets. So for us to, in our full report, we have um, a listing of what people wanted and what they thought was important. So we've talked about a number of them, but we put them in buckets to try to have these categories to put people's comments into.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we've been very difficult to capture them, but that took a long time. So we see that people want some change. They want their voice heard, and it's not militant.
Yeah, Marlene, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I was personally surprised to see at the leadership level very high numbers. Do you remember, Marlene, LGBTQ?
Yeah.
I feel like it was like number 3 or something, like super high, in that leadership level. And, it made me wonder, like, okay, are these people, outwardly or were they the people answering the survey? Did they have bosses that they knew were LGBTQ? Because again, this is one of those identities that unless you maybe tell people openly about it, you would maybe never know about a person. So to have like high numbers like that was interesting. It was just interesting, and so awesome. But I just found it to be really, really interesting that at that leadership level, we were seeing that. Is that right, Marlene? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I'm actually just pulling it up because I have 7 million numbers in my mind. So
Yeah, I'm sure. But to go back to that last slide, since we're at the top of the hour, I want to respect your timeline, Maggie, and everybody out there. The slide said our full report is going to be available April 18th. That is coming up soon on the Women in Drones website. So Women in Drones member will receive a discount. We are charging for that. We got a little bit of flack from certain parties for that, but here's the deal. You know how many hundreds of hours of work we put into this? Between Sharon, Marlene, and myself, creating the survey, tabulating the survey, analyzing the survey, writing 100+ page report, we didn't get a dime for any of that. And so whatever funds we get from this, frankly, is not going to compensate us for our time, almost guaranteed. But this was a labor of love for us, and we're hoping to launch it. But I wanted to kind of put that out there because I think some people are like, well, why, there was a summary that was free, but why is the report? And that's, by the way, also industry standard, drone EII, Droney, they put out their market survey, drone analysts, and they're charging thousands of dollars. We are not. But we are charging something just because, I think sometimes I'll just be honest, as women, we tend to undervalue our worth and what our work is worth. And maybe our price is going to show that, but at least we are charging, and that is why. The other thing I want to say real quick, if I could do one real quick shameless plug, I am holding, P3 Tech is holding a Law Tech Connect workshop, and I don't know if I'm able to share my screen. It looks like I can. So I'm going to just show you super quick. So this is going to be on Monday, April 25th. If you're going to AUVSI Exponential, please, please, please join us. Very nominal fee. Write this down. I'll put it in the chat. There's a $100 promotion code. It is Expo 22 P3 LTC, like P3 Tech Law Tech Connect. That will give you $100 off. Okay. And I think there's a misunderstanding that if you just buy the normal conference pass, you get to go to my event for free. That is not the case. Mine is co-located. It is not actually part of AUVSI. It's with AUVSI. I'm collaborating with them. However, conversely, if you register for my event, you will get a free Expo Hall pass. So in other words, you don't have to buy another Expo Hall pass to run around the floor, 3 football fields long for 3 days. That is free, as are all meals that whole day. And for attorneys, if you know attorneys, This isn't just for attorneys, it's for industry. And frankly, most of the people that have registered are from industry. Attorneys do get 8 continuing legal education credits towards their bar requirements. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you so much, Maggie, Ernest, everybody, Sharon, for letting me share that. That's how you register. It is also on the AUVSI website under co-located events, education co-located events.
Okay, and then you put it in the chat too, right, Dawn?
And I will put the actual registration link
Okay.
in the chat as
Well,
well.
we are, it's top of the hour, 3 minutes up. Really appreciate your insight, and Marlene and Dawn. And again, thank you, Sharon Rossmark, for putting the effort into actually asking some really hard questions and getting that response. I'm really looking forward to the next survey and seeing what changes in the culture that we do see. So if you have any questions still for Marlene or Dawn, feel free to put it in the chat. But we're going to move on next to Sharon Rossmark, the president of Women in Drones, and Sam Scully. So go ahead, Sharon, take over. Oh, by the way, survey. Speaking of surveys, we're going to be putting the survey in the chat. Please fill that out. And one of the questions specifically asks about how you can get involved in the diversity and DEI, and how you can implement it in your company, or organization. Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate your patience.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Maggie, for the introduction and the opportunity to once again present today. And thanks to my colleagues, Dawn and Marlene, for an overview of our 2021 DEI survey. Great job, team members. Way to go. So let me kind of switch the gears here. And this next conversation is aligned with what Dawn and Marlene just shared with us. And it's more focused on looking at how we're going to fill these positions in the future. You know, as the ladies mentioned, the growth of the industry is going to be dependent upon filling these key roles. And part of that is getting youth involved. And so our next guest today is a woman who has taken on a personal responsibility for saying, I want to be a part of growing this industry through youth. And so with me today is Samantha Scully. She's the CEO of Scully Staffing, and she is quite the entrepreneur, quite impressive background, but I probably couldn't do it any justice. So Sam, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and then share your presentation. And then once you're done, we'll spend a few minutes on Q&A, either from the audience or certainly questions that I will ask. So Sam, it's on you.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, Sharon, for inviting me. And thank you, Maggie, for including me to be part of this presentation today. I'm live here in Los Angeles. And as Sharon said, my newest company is Sam Scully Staffing. But I started a company years ago, back in 1990, when I got out of the military. I didn't get any job offers from IBM or Microsoft. So I started a company called Techno. And Techno Computer Training basically just led me to go out and get my own contracts and start using my skills from using 286, 386s, if you all remember those numbers, 46 computers, and just started me to go out to get into the community and train people. And mostly in the beginning, I started to train, I guess you would call them millennials. They were still in college. But my first student was actually really my brother. Most people don't even know I have a brother. His name is Kendrick. And Kenny, he's an engineer. And I started training him, I think as early as 10, because I was responsible for making sure that he was alive when my mom came home because he was asthmatic. And I was also responsible for training him his algebra. And as time went on, I trained him AutoCAD. And then as he grew up, he ended up getting a job as an engineer working for NASA. And so after being responsible for training my cousins and my brothers, what happened with my career, I continued to stay in training, started another training company, moved to Los Angeles, and started an instructional design training company, and still technical training. But what I found was that there was a lack of women and there was a lack of people of color. So I decided to start my staffing company. And she said, okay, all right, Sam, you started all these companies. Where are you now? Well, after starting my staffing company, I got invited to a drone conference. And this is where I met Sharon back in 2019. And at this drone conference at Inner Drone, I had no idea what a drone really was. I just know that I wanted to go to the conference, and I go to the conference and I leave the conference and I said, okay, well, I like this. I think I like this. So I end up joining Women in Drones, still not knowing that I was going to get my pilot's license a year later. But I did end up getting my pilot's license. And from there, I said, okay, now that I have my license, what do I really want to do? And I started getting led to the educational market, to where the youth were, because I thought that, okay, yes, there's not enough women. Yes, there's not enough people of color, but also if I want to kind of do with what I did with my brother, Kenny, I've got to start with them with the youth while they're young. So my goal is to demonstrate to you all some of the programs that I have worked with over the last year and a half, and tell you how they have influenced me, and also tell you why I'm passionate about introducing aerospace, because I believe that by introducing aerospace to the youth, to the community, to their families, that we can first of all, we can have some engagement, we can have some inclusion, we can also have connection, and moreover, we can have conversations about how we can work within their communities and talk about sustainability by using drones. So as I mentioned, my goal is to kind of go over some of the programs that I've worked in and tell you what my experience was.
Next, you want me to go advance that for you?
Yes, yes, please.
Thank you. You just have to give me a nod or something, please, Sam.
Okay, thanks. So I think my next slide here, this slide here, I just kind of wanted to, again, give you an overview. That background is a picture of me taking a picture somewhere out in Malibu with my drone. And also you see Maggie on that picture, because before I could actually use my stick skills good, Maggie took it upon herself to come out to California from Texas to actually train me on how to properly use my drone. Because like I say, I did, pass my exam, but I wasn't really good at my stick skills. So I started to, get my stick skills. And once I started to train myself and getting confident, then I started being asked to participate in different programs, such as the programs that we're going to talk about on the next slide. So the first program that I want to, first is an overview. There was about 5 of them. One of the programs is called Crypto Kids Camp. Crypto Kids Camp, I'll get into the details, but the last day of that camp is held here in Los Angeles, and I do the drone portion. The next program I'm going to talk about is the girls greatness. I've been invited to that camp again. I was invited during the COVID time, but of course nobody was meeting personally, so we didn't have that camp, but now we're going to have it. And this time we're going to talk about the careers that the young ladies can get in the UAS, UAV industry. One of the other camps was this past summer, where I got a chance to go down to San Diego, and I was a drone judge, and I was able to judge young ladies on their drone programs that they had created. And then lastly, one of the newest programs that I'll go over you with is US Drone Soccer. Some of you might have heard about that, but that's one of the most newest ones, and one of the more exciting ones, because that's going to, again, allow community growth.
I'm involved in that organization as well, and I think it's wonderful.
Yes, and I'm building my team, and of course,
Okay.
Maggie's all up in my life, so Maggie's on that team as well.
Awesome, that's awesome.
So we can, Marlene, we can move on to the next one. We can get right into it if you don't have any questions. Okay, so Crypto Kids Camp. This was started by a young lady called Naja Roberts. I met Naja Roberts through Black Women in Tech, and she's a phenomenal person. She developed this camp so that kids could have 5 days. The first day they do Bitcoin, they go through robotics, they learn about drones. Of course, that's where I come in. And they also get to go home with all of the materials that they worked on. So I'll just start with that picture that you see in the corner. That was a group of kids. They all came in and they had been together for, 5 days, but still they really weren't getting along. They were getting along, but I think they got along better once they started playing with the drones. Initially, my goal with the course was to basically teach them FAA safety standards for flying the drone. So that consisted of, let me look at my notes here. That consisted of basically, once we went over the FAA safety rules, I broke them off into 5 teams. We built, first of all, we started with paper airplanes, and then we built a delivery map. So within the 5 teams, we had somebody who would, basically who was the visual observer. We also had someone who was recording the delivery map, the length from the time they flew in. They flew the paper airplanes. And then after that, we actually opened up the drones for them because they had their own drones. They weren't Trellos. They were just some off-brand drones that were not charged. And so we had the liberty of having to charge, and they had to help because I had over 20 kids. So we got all the drones charged. And before I could even start giving them stick instructions, they were already on their own flying the drones. And you will see that there's a big shipping that area where you see the picture on the right. That is where we were. We were kind of like we were in San Pedro. So we were where you store the shipping containers. So that area was large enough where you could park your cars as well as fly the drones. But we did have nets to keep the drones from going into other parts. So the kids really enjoyed it. And they all walked away, like I say, with the drone, and they all walked away with inspiration that, hey, I might want to be a drone pilot. Oh, hey, I might want to be a maintenance person. But they were all excited. And what I liked about the program, they just took to it. And then you see pictures at the bottom, the last day of the program of the camp, all of the parents came and some of the organizers, because we did the drone portion in the morning. And so that was their graduation. But during graduation, they were still flying the drones. We had to say, hey, you got to put the drones down so you can graduate. But they were really that excited. So the reason I like being part of Crypto Kids Camp, because that helps me with my mission that I'm talking to young people who, first of all, didn't know anything about drones. But by the end of that 4 or 5 hours, not going to say proficiently fly, but they all knew how to go airborne and bring them down. And they also, learn how to repair them. Because of course, when you got 20 kids flying drones, what I did learn from that, you need a lot more. You need a little bit more space because they were flying them into the walls and everything like that. So Marlene, if you don't mind going to the next slide.
No problem.
So, program is she has something called beast mode. And in the beast mode, I won't read it to you, but you do see where the drones show up under the technology part, under the mode part. So she uses this as a model to say these are the different types of technologies, robotics, and other types of information we're going to fit into this program. And this is how this works for Crypto Kids Camp. So I will pause right there to find out if you have any questions for me.
Sam, it's Maggie. I have a quick question.
Yes.
How do they recruit the kids? And was there a cost for them to initially participate in this program?
As far as recruiting the kids, since Naja is kind of already heavily into the community, she lives in Inglewood and has a physical Bitcoin shop. So, and she has a big community, a big connection with the Inglewood community. As far as the cost, that I know of, there's no cost. I think the kids are all given scholarships, and that's why, and she has a lot of sponsors. So they all, like I say, were able to walk away with laptops, and I forgot they even had cell phones.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. I mean,
So they got to basically walk away with a basket of goodies. but that were electronic.
Right, right. That's great. Thank you.
Any other, I thought I heard another question.
No, there's no additional questions at this time. You could go on to the next program.
Okay. All right. So my next one, this one, as I was mentioning, this is the girls teen camp to greatness. I originally was invited in 2020 and was going to physically be there, but not. And so, but they included me for 2022. So this one, we are basically talking about careers. They're giving me 45 minutes to go over career paths that have to do with drones. And so what I did is basically I use the STEAM model. I'm saying STEAM for science. And within the science area, I wanted to say, okay, this is what you could do for climate change. You could work in forest regeneration, or you can assess lands after a natural disaster. So that's my science. So I'll be focusing on for technology. I'll be talking to them about, okay, why not be a UAS pilot? Why not consider being a drone repair technician or programming and coding? Engineering, drones for first responders. A lot of you are familiar with that. Director automation or artificial intelligence. Or you could use a drone for mapping and tracking, mapping and tracking. For arts, I have videography. We'll go over that real briefly. Area photography, and also concept and story development for arts. For mathematics, which is my favorite subject, data science, data systems. They could be a back-end developer, or they could create real-world challenges using their VR equipment. And I think that's the last one. So based off of my STEAM model, those are the type of areas I'll be discussing with them. And I'm also going to be using a video. I found this video on YouTube where this young lady, as she videotaped herself bringing her drone equipment from her house to her car to the hotel. So I want to also kind of give them a visual, using a drone is important, and there's lots of safety, but there's also lots of equipment. And I know I heard earlier that, you also need to have like a checklist. So you make sure that as you're packing up for a gig, that you have all of your equipment. And because that is something that I actually had used before myself, and realizing that I needed to have a checklist. So I'll make sure that we go over things like that. So that camp, not that camp, but that workshop, I'll do 2 of those workshops, like say within 45 minutes. And they wanted me to, fly the drone. And I said, well, 45 minutes, we really don't have time. I go, but I will have time to show them a series of drones that they could, consider buying, or their parents could consider buying. Because this workshop is for 8-year-olds to 18-year-olds. I'll pause there. Any questions?
Sam, there's no questions in the chat. So in our remaining minutes, if you'd like to go over the next program, and then we'll take any additional questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Okay, so my newest program that I recently teamed up in the process of, like I say, bringing together my team now. And I'm lucky that Maggie's going to be part of it because she has better stick skills than me. But the newest one is drone soccer. And like I say, some of you might already know about it, but it's part of the World Sports Federation. They're out of Olympic City, Colorado. And what I like about US drone soccer is it focuses too on STEM, and robotics. And also it is providing a gateway for young people that are under 16 to get involved. Because Drone Academy, US drone soccer, they start at age 12. So from age 12 to 16, we can basically build a league. And you say, well, Sam, how are they going to do all of that? Well, first of all, they're going to have certified trainers like myself and Maggie. We are going to be certified. We're going to be going out supporting the teams. We're going to be making sure that they have the right equipment. And we're also going to be making sure they know how to repair it, as well as directing them into career paths. But as these young people start to be mesmerized by the sports, they're going to not only, be not playing, but using technology. They're also going to be using teamship, because they too have to break off into a team. Somebody's got to be the VR, somebody's got to be the repair, somebody's also got to put the drones together. They've also got to be tested. They also have responsibilities of keeping a log. So with their program, I am a champion of it, because I see this as a way, getting back to the original conversation, to include youth. Because if we don't work on our youth and we don't show them what is possible, then they're not going to know. Because I didn't know what was possible until I got invited to Interdrone. I just said, hey, why not? Why not go? I showed up and did not know that 2 years later that I was going to be talking to you all about how to get youth involved using drones themselves. And I'm just excited to be in this industry. And I'm also excited to be part of this network, because if it wasn't for women in drones, women like Sharon, Dawn, and Maggie, and Marlene championed me, I would not be here. And I wouldn't even have the confidence, because I listened to these ladies on podcasts. I remember when I was listening to Dawn podcast back in 2020, and I would listen to them over and over because I was like, okay, this is the only way I'm going to be able to learn. And from attending Coffee Connection that we have every Tuesday, I also learn from the guys. I learn from the women, but I also learn from the men. So like I say, I'm just excited to be part and be a champion for the youth. And that's why I wanted to talk about, let's include the youth in our conversation when it comes about diversity and inclusion. And I yield the mic.
Sharon?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sam. I don't see any questions from the audience. I see a couple of comments. Dawn said, Sam, your programs are amazing. And I totally agree. I loved your engagement. I do have a couple of questions, since we only have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
So the first couple of programs sounds like you were primarily based in the Los Angeles area where you live, but the drone soccer is really around the globe, but particularly here in the States. My understanding is that you're actually going to be involved in multiple states and leading drone soccer teams. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I decided for my team to include the state of Texas, which Maggie will represent, and we will support her, and also the state of Alabama, because I have some connections there and some family there. And U.S. Drone Soccer is part of the World Sports Games that's coming up. That's at the end of July in Birmingham, Alabama. And I am hopefully that me and my team members will be able to be part of that event to help champion that. And so I think by having a representative in Texas and Alabama and California will again help us be part of that inclusion and diversity.
And if people want to know more about your various programs, how can they reach you?
They can reach me. I put my information in the chat. You can actually call me on the phone. You can follow my Instagram, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, or just reach out to me by email.
Okay. We do have someone that's asked a question. Nyla Mosley asked, are there any partnerships with libraries, especially in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area?
Not yet, but I am open to conversations. We do have a contact in the DC area who might be coming on our team. And I could follow up with you, and we could go from there.
I think that's great. And so just at a high level, if someone is interested in partnering with you, what's involved with becoming one of your team members?
The first thing we have to do with the U.S. Drone, as of now, my first team consists of 5 people, including myself. So if I wanted to build another team, I would basically purchase another drone set through U.S. Drone Soccer, because their kit is about getting the drone sockers themselves and actually training them. So we would basically have to be trained under U.S. Drone Soccer, because it's required, because we can't train the librarians the teachers, or the parents if we're not certified to put the drones together and know how they work. And so after going through training, then we are going to be those field soldiers to go out and go establish those relationships, like you say, with libraries, museums, and CTEs.
Great. And are there any additional points you'd like to make before we turn it back over to Maggie so she stays on time?
The only point I would like to make is that if you have nephews and nieces that are 12 and above, or even 12 and under, it's never too early to get them involved, whether you start with paper airplanes, or you start with the little inexpensive drones, or you start with robotics. But I think it's really upon us as the adults to, instead of, buying guest jeans, let's buy them a ticket to a camp, a drone camp that might be hosted, or let's buy them a US drone soccer kit to get them started.
I
Wonderful.
think that's a great point. Marlene, I'm sorry, you had a question?
No, I was just saying that that's wonderful. I'm definitely going to circle back with you, Sam. Talk to you about
Thank
what we're-
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Sam, for joining us today and for sharing information about the wonderful programs. I admire your leadership and your engagement in helping our youth, and they are our future. And the only way we're going to get there is by people like you reaching
30
out.
minutes
And
go quick.
it does. It really does. So thank you for your time. And Maggie, I'll
Thank
turn
you
it
so
over
much,
to you.
Sharon, for having me. And thank you,
Yeah.
Maggie.
Oh,
Don,
thank
Marlene.
you, Sam. I wish I could just clone you and put you to every single state, because we really do need representation of this industry. And the more that our youth specifically can identify with the presenter or somebody that is as a leader, like Dawn was saying, if we can identify with that leader and understand that we could be in that same position and that we could do those same accomplishments, I think that that's so important. And that's why education for me is the number one key for not just the youth, but for the general public and for, of course, our industry. So thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. And I want everyone to please fill out the survey today. It's specifically addressing several of these points. And, this is, again, our 18th session, and we have a few left over. So we want to make sure that we address the topics and the information that you want to hear. And of course, we always end our session with Evan Morelli. Evan Morelli has been my partner in flying. And so we switch off and on as the VO and the pilot. And I've learned so much from Evan, even with these the 18 sessions that we have. Evan always goes into safety first. So Evan, take it away. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you, Sammy.
You're welcome, Maggie.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Where it is. There it is.
I can only see half of your face.
Oh,
There we
well,
go. That's
you
a
see
little
my
better.
my PowerPoint now?
Yes, step
Okay.
by step. Mhm.
Hi, my name is Evan. Evan Morelli. I own Elm Aerial Services, and in conjunction with kind of what we were talking about today, what I wanted to talk about is a couple core subject matters that, whether you're a business, an educator, working with kids, adults, beginners, or advanced users, these are important subject matters that not only increase the safety factor in any kind of operation, whether again it's with kids or what have you, whether professional, educational, whatever it is, but also will make a meaningful effect as far as your ability to operate different missions. So I kind of adapted my normal presentation. I'm sure there's probably people that have been here before. So we're going to talk about these particular subject matters, and I'll go a little bit more in depth to them. So with on-site considerations, one of the things is you have to be able to manage your environment, right? So visual line of sight is going to be very important when you're conducting any operation. So if you're like, with children or like with middle schoolers and such, you need to figure out whether or not you're going to be using a overhead cage environment, whether you're going to be outdoors actually interacting in the national airspace, or whether you're going to be in like a gymnasium or something like that, similar to the drone soccer league that was referred to earlier. That will make a meaningful difference as to the number of visual observers that you're going to need and the number of registered pilots that you're going to need, and whether or not your students have taken the various courses that they need to do to have their license. if you are flying out in the national airspace, the visual line of sight recommendation or requirement is going to actually take an effect, and you're going to have visual observers placed out around your operation, whether it's again professional or educational, and using kind of what I like to call like a zone defense type scenario where you are going to have to pre-position them around obstacles and corners, as well as if you are, doing an after school event or you're near what's called civil twilight. That's what's really going to define whether or not you are night flying or not. And if you look up where you are, just on Google, say like, we're here in DFW, like I'm here in Plano. So, hey, Plano, Texas, what's civil twilight? Google will tell you, and you'll get to know when your operation, whether you're technically a night flying or not. So that's an important threshold to be aware of, as well as weather visibility limitations. Again, in this North Texas region, I mean, a couple months ago, it could have been 30 degrees in the morning and 80 in the afternoon. Big winds, then it's still. Thunderstorms in the afternoon after a nice sunny day. Weather can change dramatically, and what you planned on flying, maybe in the morning when you're putting together your operation or your lesson plan, can be radically different in the afternoon. So the next
Evan,
subject.
do you mind talking a little bit about the difference between flying inside as opposed to outside? Because I know that there's different requirements because, in the inside, it's not regulated by the FAA, but as soon as you step out, it is regulated by the FAA. And so that there's other requirements, meaning like instructors have to be in 107. They have to be close enough to grab the controls if they need to. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, you're absolutely right. When you're doing an operation or you're doing like you could be doing an inspection inside of a factory for like a professional context, but obviously for an educational context, there are a lot of educational programs that do something similar where they take like a batting cage off Amazon, which is a very good structure to use for indoor drone flying, and operate little small drones, maybe with brush guards and what have you, inside of gymnasium. You are not in national airspace at that time, so there's not the same kind of rules that apply. For instance, like having the person flying be the pilot in command, right, and having one person per drone. Those rules don't necessarily apply. You still need to consider radically the safety factor involved. When I was working with a company called 1080, they were doing an indoor drone program with various students in Chicago and North Carolina and what have you. And we would have 2 drone cages that were segmented into 2 sections. And we were using some really light brushed motor drones that didn't have a lot of torques and had very flimsy, easy to manage propellers, which is another factor too. If you're going to be working in a confined environment and you're not doing a professional, like for pay type operation, the simpler and the lighter and the least complex, the better. They're going to break all the time. They're going to, people are going to, the kids are going to act like a fool with them. You just can't control kids sometimes. So you want to mitigate risk as much as possible. You also, but as Maggie mentioned, you really want to be able to, and you need to be able to, not just because it's safe, but in an outdoor scenario, it's required, be able to grab the controller at any time. So what we did is we did one like trainee that I would train. I was the pilot in command at that time, and I had other adults that I gave a safety briefing to about, hey, if they're starting to do this, if they're starting to, try to fly a drone at another person, or if there's kids coming into the cage that aren't supposed to be in there, which happens a lot. People want to go play with their friends. Take the controller, just grab the controller. There are, depending upon what kind of drones you're using, especially from like RC planes and RC helicopters, there are trainer cables you can get. So you'll have like the student having his, and they're more sophisticated transmitters, but there'll be the student will have one transmitter and there'll be a wire connected to the transmitter of the teacher or the supervisor person. And you can flick a switch, just a little tap on the controller, and it blocks out the student, and then the teacher can take command of the the UAV. So you've got to always kind of be aware of that. So working inside the environment, inside an overhead environment, inside of a gymnasium, you're not going to have to deal with the same 107 requirements, though a lot of them are practically applicable inside of like the cage or what have you that you have in there. You're still going to want to have visual observers. You're still going to want to really have one person managing one drone at a time. If you have a bunch of drones going on everywhere, what ends up happening, especially with kids, is you're going to end up having a bunch of drones caught in nets. And you're going to get hung up on that and spend a ton of time untangling drones out of nets. That's probably, apart from the safety, the number one thing that will inhibit your operation is constantly untangling drones out of those nets. It's good that they caught them, but it's going to kill a lot of time and you're going to have a lot less students that you can deal with.
Evan, what about performance? What about performance inside versus outside? It, you know, with inside, there's a lot more interruptions and they fly a little bit more wonky, do they not? I mean, is that why a instructor would choose outside versus inside, or could you touch on that a little bit?
So inside, you're inherently super limited on your operations. I would say that in my experience, when I was working with any kind of student, the inside was for fine-tune articulation of like navigating courses. So we'd set up hoops and stuff inside the actual cages, but you don't have to deal with wind and feedback in runaways as well, which happens sometimes, not as much now, but if you want to, but you're going to have a more controlled environment. I would say that as your students get more advanced, then take them outside, because there's a lot more things that can go wrong outside and a lot more factors such as wind and weather. But you know, let's say you're flying your little drone and they punch it, it's going to go either really high or really far. That means they could hit a car. That means it can, you know, and this is something to keep in mind. You can always outfly your drone. If you punch it and make it go, you know, scream off into the distance, it'll straight outrun its connection. And then it's pretty much just a missile. And it's just going to crash into whatever it's going to crash into, unless as a return to home feature or something like that. But then you're talking about a much more expensive piece of equipment, which may not be within your budget. So I'd say with beginner students and students that aren't either really that serious, they're still just trying to kind of play with it, it's still kind of a toy to them, they're not pursuing it at a more intermediate level, keep them inside. It's just much easier to manage. It's much safer. It's much more controllable. But as they get more advanced, there is definitely strategic advantages to going outside. Your capability of doing advanced operations, you know, maybe running them through a larger obstacle course, or having them do flight patterns, or actually getting a meaningful altitude and having to deal with the fact that, hey, as your drone gets further away, you know, the 4 basic characteristics of managing, you know, its altitude, attitude, speed, and orientation, those things are really hard to deal with, really hard to tackle when it's a bright sunny day and you're flying across the sun line, and or they're getting super far away and you're starting to stretch your visual line of sight limitations. Those are important skills to harness, but you have to take them outside for that. So I hope that kind of answers that question.
And yes, it does. And what about you know, certain drones that you suggest for inside and outside? I mean, do you have some that you can suggest, specifically ones that where our students can learn coding?
Yeah, so from my experience, there are a lot of really simple drones out there that won't be good for coding, but are cheap and disposable. I don't necessarily have one right off the top of my head. Telos are really good for coding.
Yeah, Telos.
Absolutely.
A couple
Telos
people
are great
already.
for coding. It depends on your intent. My favorite way to teach students is I like mini whoops, which if you look, they're like 180 millimeter, really small drones, but they can be really powerful. A lot of them have brush guards around their propellers or around their props and everything. And they typically run on some sort of open source hardware or firmware for their flight control boards. I come from a racing drone background, so that's what I'm most comfortable with. But at the same time, you can program those extensively. It just takes more hardware, and you have to buy the individual widgets and kind of have a more advanced understanding of programming to do like really complicated things. And they typically don't have an autopilot in them. So it's virtually all manual flying. And I guess the way I would describe it is, if you go with something like a Tello, you're really kind of focusing on applying code to a flying platform. If you go with something like a Teeny Whoop, or one of those 180mm drones, you're really looking at I'm trying to make an effective aircraft. I'm trying to tune an aircraft with my code, right? It's kind of like the difference. DJI's drones, for instance, like the Phantoms, I would consider them more as flying camera platforms than really sophisticated aircraft. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it
So-
does. And I know that a lot of them, from the ones that don't really don't have the GPS, isn't that correct? The ones that are like $20. I mean, you could start with buying something $20, $30. Like, I think the Tellos are about $100. And I know that Parrot has one. There are several programs like Drone Soccer. They have their own drone kit that they build, and Drone Blocks also has a drone. So, I mean, there's several different options, but I just wanted people to understand. I mean, we're talking about inclusive. We want to include the youth. We want to inspire the youth. We want to get them involved, but it starts with a leader, a teacher, or a volunteer. And we're talking about the different ways of engaging the children, our youth. And I think that that's really, really important, that it is, you are capable of doing it. And not only that, but there is a lot of resources out there, grants and other things that can cover the cost of a program like this. And I think that that's also something really, really important to point out. So I appreciate your input, Evan. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to say one more thing about that. For the mapping drone, really any platform that has a camera, most of the mapping is going to happen in post-processing. So you're looking at really the data. The drone that physically collects the data, you really just need an autopilot and the ability to program the autopilot, but the vast majority of the mapping happens on the back end. So you can really do a whole lot of, you can use a whole lot of different platforms to get that. You can use a total DIY platform, or like an off-the-shelf Phantom and what have you. But the thing I wanted to say is, if you're really struggling, if you're really kind of on a budget and are willing to put the work in, there is, because of the racing drone community, the Whoops and the smaller quads, and even like all the way up to like some of the racing sized quads. There is a metric ton of resources on YouTube where people walk through in finite detail exactly how to do a million different things, from soldering and assembling your airframe, to tuning the harmonic frequencies on your ESCs, to filtering noise with capacitors, to resoldering chips that have popped off, to wiring everything and making your wiring efficient, to dealing with heat problems. So if you purchase one of those and you're really interested in deep diving into the nitty gritty, I personally and professionally, I highly recommend the DIY style of doing things. It is a lot more responsibility and you will get stuck a ton of times, but there is just so much content out there to sift through to be able to find the answer you're looking for. And the community is by and large extremely helpful. If you go into one of the forums and like, hey, I'm having this problem, there's always some really intelligent, really experienced person that's always willing to answer your question.
Right.
So-
And I think that that's why, like Sammy had suggested, and is involved in, and I'm also contributing, and I've already recruited Evan to help us at the Texas teams. But the Drone Soccer, I mean, that's exactly what they do. They have instructions on how to build the drones, and then they can add modules or anything, to give them the advancement. Just so you guys know, I always thought Drone Soccer was literally like soccer. There's a team from 5 to 10, and they go in these cages indoors, and it's almost like Quidditch. There's actually a hoop that they have to go through to score, and they don't have a lot of time to do it, but there's so many elements with a program like this, where you don't have to reinvent a whole curriculum. that they already have that in place, and that there are a lot of resources. And actually, Kyle Sanders, who runs the UAS drone soccer leagues, he's a great resource in regards to finding grants and finding funding. So if you don't even know where to start, or even how to talk to the general public or the schools about it, he will help. So I think that is it's going to the momentum is amazing. And let me see, Doug Acker, yes, definitely need the tactic response. Anyway, is there any other things that, as putting a program together, obviously safety is so important, and you have to have the support. You have to prove to whatever facility or what other schools or organizations that you're using, that you're taking all the precautions of safety. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Evan?
Yeah, there's two main areas that I think are really really important when it comes to putting together a program, and that's understanding the technology to a point where you know that you're operating safely. So, one of the big subject matters is RF interference. Where you fly matters. One of the areas I used to fly in was an indoor, like big pop-up steel frame building. Interference was terrible at the corners of the building. When we set up a racing track, we set up a track, but we kept all of the hoops that we were flying out of away from the corners of the building. And RF interference is going to be the number one thing that causes flyaways, that causes your drones to drop right out of the sky. It causes them to have GPS calibration errors. And when you have GPS calibration errors, your drone does all sorts of peculiar and unpredictable behavior. That's one of the main things you want to deal with. If you're going to be working inside, just be cognizant of that. There's only so much you can really avoid, and it won't really be as bad unless you're, in a factory type scenario. But if you're outside, try to keep it in an open field as much as you can. There's a ton of different parks, section off your area. There's local drone clubs that specifically deal with that. There's also AMA and I can't remember what they're called, but they're going to be drone specific authorized flight areas. I think CBOs, no. But keep in mind that radio and cell interference is an extremely important factor as far as dealing with your drones, and also radio connection planning, which is another huge subject. If I were doing a student program, it is extremely easy and a very good just side coupling. Get your kids their ham license. You can do it online. It only takes, I don't know, maybe a couple days of teaching and registering with the FCC. Get them their ham license. It's a great resource. It'll teach them about literally how the drones connect to their ground station. And
is there an age limit to that? Do they have to be a certain age? Because I know that with trust, I think it's 13. Is it 13 years old where they can take the trust through the FAA? But for ham, is there a age limitation?
I don't think so. I think maybe like 16. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember, but it's not the hand license. It's the shortwave radio license. So the main, sorry, Maggie, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
That's okay. That's okay. I just know that that there are some limitations, but with the drone industry, I know that the FAA had put together the trust program specifically for recreational, but I think that it's always, even if it's not a registered test through the FAA, having the youth understand the responsibilities of flying is so important, no matter how old they are. So thank you. I appreciate
absolutely. And whether there's a bunch of different types of recreational flying of drones, one of them is like long range, and it has to do with trying to get, it is beyond visual line of sight in a lot of ways. And typically people will have visual observers, pegged out at different sections and such, but you're not going to pull that off on the 2.4 gigahertz or the 5.8 gigahertz that 99% of drones that you get off the shelf are programmed to transmit with. You're going to have to go down to 900 megahertz. You're going to have to go to 1.3 gigahertz. You're going to have to go all the way down to 72 megahertz and using like Dragon Link and all sorts of different sophisticated modules to get this extra range and stuff. If they all are going to require your shortwave radio license, every single one of them. If they're not that FCC licensed channel, and if you're also power is a big factor as well. If you're going to move off of 1 milliwatt power, i.e. pushing the power a little bit further out and transmitting with more power, you're going to need your shortwave radio license. And it's a important technical skill. And, you know, kids can segue that sort of thing into working for telecom companies if they get really into it, or advertising themselves to, you know, if you have that sort of license, you may need to use a specific frequency that's not just from an off-the-shelf drone to work around telecommunications infrastructure. You know, there's a lot to be done for it. And a lot of recreational drone pilots have their ham license, because when you have multiple drones interacting in the same space, you get a lot of overlap, and being able to have that range to move to a different channel that requires a bit more responsibility in that license, therefore giving you that clarity, and you don't get a lot of cross hatching between your connection, will make a huge difference. It can be a real asset. So
When it, you know, you're deciding to fly inside or outside, like, I know that Sharon Rossmark had to go to a school, and they didn't really have a appropriate facility like a gymnasium or something like that had high ceilings. They actually flew the drones in the hallway, you know, just adapted to it. But, you know, I mean, can you do that? I mean, are those factors important?
Yeah, I think they are. Like I said, most of when I'm working inside, it's for basic flying or for very regimented flying, i.e. like an AI automated flying scenario. I did a lot of my teaching in, like I said, batting cages you could buy off Amazon. Yeah, they're pretty big and they're a pain to set up. But yeah, definitely a hallway. You just have to take the consideration of nobody can just be walking through that hall, right? You have to, you know, quarter off that hallway to make sure that you're not going to have just random bystanders going through there. But yeah, you certainly can do that. That's just going to change the profile, your flight profile. You know, so that's certainly a thing. But also keep in mind when you're inside, especially if you're around school infrastructure, like you're not going to be doing acrobatic mode or tilt mode or whatever. You're going to be pretty much in stability mode. You're going to be down tuned to those drones quite a bit because they're fast. They're really, really fast. Even the cheap ones, if you unlock their firmware and let them go to what they can do, they'll fly pretty fast. So yeah, I think it is. I agree. It is more about floor space, having the physical area, because frankly, it doesn't matter what type of flying you're doing, unless you have a specific reason to go high, like really high up, it doesn't add anything to your flight. You don't learn something greater just because you're at 50 feet versus 100 feet versus 5 feet. It doesn't really make that big a difference as far as, you know, yes, you may have less obstacles. So technically it could be easier, or you may have to learn how to deal with crosswinds because you are a little bit higher up. But most of the skill flying happens very close to the ground.
Got a really odd question.
Sure.
If you're in a cage, but you're outside, is it still the FAA regulations?
No, because you're still in a overhead environment, right? So if you were in, like, for instance, like I don't know, not like a sunroom, but I don't know, some area that would be like a larger batting cage that they'd have a golf course or like putt-putt golf or something like that, or like a mini golf place. Yeah, you were not, because that drone is contained within a facility technically. It cannot penetrate through the walls and go anywhere. So no.
Walls or ceiling, because it has to have.
It has to have a ceiling.
Yeah.
It has to be, if it's completely contained, even if that container is partially see-through or, you know, is like a chain link fence type ceiling or whatever for like a cage. No, you're not in the national airspace, because it, you know, unless it leaves that particular area, no, you're not in national airspace. So the rules would not apply the same way that they would if you were outside of that building. So
well, we have about 3 minutes left, and you know, normally we go through all the safety procedures and everything like that. But again, I just want to emphasize the reason why we're talking today is about, inclusion and, including everyone and being fair and reaching out to maybe some of the groups that wouldn't have been exposed to the UAS industry. With the 3 minutes that we have remaining, Evan, do you want to emphasize any of that, or is there anything that you really want as a takeaway for the group today?
I say my takeaway and what I'd like to add is the barrier of entry is much lower than people think. Like I said, with recreational drones, the way I got into it is I literally just bought a small drone and went on YouTube and bashed my head against the wall till I finally figured out what I was doing. You can get used transmitters relatively cheap that USB plug into your computer, and you can get a simulator off Steam for like 15 bucks. If you're interested in it, don't be intimidated by the $3,000 Phantoms. Those you may never even fly those drones or ever even want to fly those drones. There is a very low barrier of entry way of getting an enormous amount of experience. So do that. And I always recommend doing a simulator, because you can crash 10,000 times and learn how to not crash with the same transmitter you would use, the exact same sticks you'll use with a real life drone. So you get all that muscle memory, and that muscle memory is the huge, most important thing, the experience and the practice. And so my biggest takeaway for like educators is stick time. Get your kids on the sticks, as much physical time flying as you possibly can. And the simulators are a great way to do that. So that would be the number one takeaway. They can learn a lot of different things through self-study, but stick time is like absolutely pivotal to really understanding the technology. So that's what I got.
Sam was asking about, does anyone know about Raspberry Pi?
There are a
Makes me
lot
hungry. But
there are
what is it?
there are a lot of Raspberry Pi drones you can do. There's a couple firmwares that you can find online where you can flash onto a Raspberry Pi and make a drone. It's not super common, but yeah, they exist. I personally have not dealt with it. I use a lot of like Betaflight and using more of the acro drone or the racing drone type firmwares. But yeah, they have Raspberry Pi, Arduino. Actually, Arduino Copter, if you're interested in using Arduino, that's a really solid open source platform to start building drones. That's what I use with my helicopter. I have a gas powered helicopter that I use Arducopter on. So I recommend that one.
Well, thank you, Evan. It's top of the hour, and really appreciate everyone's participation specifically, and very grateful for both Marlene and Dawn and Sam, and of course Sharon and Evan. Been very informative today, and please fill out that survey, reach out to the presenters, or just reach out to NorthTexasUAS.com. That's our website. We'll have this recorded, but if you have any questions or you need to contact somebody and you missed it, please feel free to reach out to us in the website, and we'll make sure that you get the information. Really appreciate everyone's time today. Really value that you took 2 hours to learn a little bit more about DEI, and also how we can educate and expose our youth to this amazing industry. So with that being said, next month, we're going to be talking with HAF, and also with a company that specifically focuses on mapping, 3D mapping, surveying. It's going to be a real informative workshop, but we only have a couple more left. So I really want you guys to fill out that survey again, so that I know what topics you really want to hear for the next couple months. So please reach out to us, and I want to thank everyone again, and you have a great Saturday. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Maggie. Bye, everyone.
Bye everyone. Thank you so much.